long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella Dei Mater Alma ad semper Virgo Felix
Everybody, Steve Sensman. I'm coming at you once again with Michael Greaney and Don Brohawn, co-authors of the book Economic Personalism, at the CESG website. Is it .com or .org?
.org.
.org. So, guys, good morning again. Welcome.
Good morning, Steve.
So today we're doing political animal. So, what is that? What? Explain that to people that think that's what are we talking about?
Well, to start off in a more human way, I'll let Dawn, because she talks more like a human being than I do.
That's just it. Michael's not human.
Well, I didn't say that. And I'm not admitting anything.
Yes. So Mike's going to give you the historical roots of the term, but one way of describing it is it relates to the idea of personalism and the nature of human beings. And it starts with the assumption that all of us are human beings in equally as a human being with those characteristics of what it means to be a person. And also, so you have an individual side to each of us. We're unique. I mean, our DNA is different. And we live in different circumstances, and we've been born into different cultures, and we understand things differently. We have different abilities, but there's some things that are inherent to human nature. And in that human nature, you have what would be the individual nature of someone, their uniqueness, but you also have the social aspect of human beings that we can't survive without each other. I mean, there are people who think that of themselves as the strong individualist who's made it through life on their own, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. But I would say, well, take a look around you. If you believe that, did you make your own clothes? Did you build your own car? Did you build your own house? When you earn a living, did you do that completely by yourself? Do you live in a situation where you can, what the laws are and that there are punishments for the laws and various things like that? And those are products of people from the beginning of human society coming together and developing ways that we all can live together and benefit by living together and sharing ideas and building tools, etc. So if you understand that we have to take into consideration, we talk about human beings and talk about how we address problems in the world, we have that challenge in that each person is unique. And if you try and apply, using the power of government, for example, one overall solution, you could be actually destroying or abolishing someone's rights, if you believe in rights. So you have to look at the impact on the individual. You also have to look at the social context. Is when we come up with a solution, it's not to just address one person at a time, it's to come up with a solution that changes the environment with which we live with each other so every one of us can thrive. So that's when I say political. Mike will give you a more specific term, but it is really the recognition of the individual nature of every human being and the social nature. They're both intertwined.
Yeah. I almost said essentially again, and I promised I wouldn't keep saying that word.
I thought it was basically.
They have to switch to basically or fundamentally. But when we say, that human beings are both individuals and social, what we're doing is we're acknowledging the binary nature of personalism itself, because personalism is based on a binary relationship, or actually a whole universe of binary relationships. For instance, personalism makes a distinction between persons and things. The rather happily named binary economics distinguishes between labor and capital. This does not separate them, it distinguishes them. There's a big difference between saying that they're separate and acknowledging that they are distinct things in and of themselves. It's like faith and reason. Sometimes in practice you can't separate them. There is a binary relationship between faith and reason. You need both, but they're not the same thing. So that when we say that human beings are political animals, the term is Aristotle. Political itself comes from polis, his word for the organized community, the city. That was the ideal of Greek, political life. I mean, the very word political comes from polis, the city. So that Aristotle acknowledged we are both individuals, have an individual nature and a social nature, or as he put it, we have a political nature. We're individuals who, by our nature, organize with other individuals to form a consciously structured social entity called the polis. Okay, that's your Greek lesson for the day. Now you can say it's all Greek to you and actually know what you're talking about. Now, that is the essence of personalism itself, is that you have a binary relationship in which you acknowledge that there are two different things, but they are not separated. They have to go together. That's why when we talk about economic personalism, which is what eventually we're getting to here, we talk about labor and capital. Now, unfortunately, the modern wage system has divided labor and capital, simply because labor has been turned into a factor of production that the owners of capital purchase in order to help make their capital productive. Labor and capital are no longer joined together the way an individual should be in society. In other words, when we call someone a person, legally, person is a human being defined with respect to his place in society. In another way, legal way of defining person, it's that which has rights. Rights are what recognize you and cause and allow you to interact in society. This is why we form artificial persons like corporations, so that they have a social identity. I mean, as Father Ferry observed in his lectures on social charity, which we won't get into, and you can thank me for it later, the act of organizing itself, in a sense, creates an artificial person. And Father Ferry, of course, being a Catholic priest, mentioned Jesus's saying that when 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name. Now, that has its obvious theological meanings, which we won't get into. What Father Ferry went into was a sort of subtext on that, which, because almost everything in the Gospels and in the Bible itself has different levels of meaning, as does, for instance, Dante's Divine Comedy. I mean, I think they counted 7 different levels of meaning. Well, the meaning that Father Ferry drew out of what Jesus said about when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am, or words to that effect. I don't remember the exact quote. Of course, I don't speak Aramaic either. That what you have is the formation through organization of a certain personality. It's not natural personality, but it comes from organization. It's the creation, in a sense, of an artificial person, so that when we create a corporation in law, What we're doing is legally recognizing this for social purposes so that a corporation, through its agents, can act as if it were a person. So that what personalism does is recognize we are both individuals and social, a combination that Aristotle called political.
Great. And I think another way of saying what Mike just explained is if you compare the words individual and person, you could have an individual who's was on a shipwreck and he's floated to a desert island and he's living all by himself and he's got to survive on his own. He's got to get food and shelter, but he's not having to relate to any other human being. So let's say there happen to be ferocious tigers on the island. He's not going to be able to get into any kind of argument or discussion about rights with the tiger. He's either going to he kill the tiger's going to get him.
So in a very dark place.
Yeah, I'm in a dark place this morning, yes. But the point is, when you talk about persons, and as Mike said, it part of the definition has to do with the rights that human being has in relationship to other human beings or to institutions such as the government. You can only talk about rights in a social context, even if it's, let's say, just one other person or two other people. You're going to have to figure out how you interact in such a way you don't step on each other's toes, and hopefully if you cooperate together, you're going to be able to determine a fair way of dividing the rewards from your common efforts. So person is a very distinct term in relationship to the word individual. Now, the other word that's important, and Mike was talking about artificial persons being created by the interaction and organization of people, is institutions. Now, an institution can't exist without people interacting and living within them and having some ongoing relationship to them. But it also is something that goes beyond the individual human beings who are, at any moment happen to be interacting in it. For example, just taking a business corporation, you may have several generations of people who work there, the management, leadership, etc. But when they leave, the institution is still there. And part of the reason is that people have, in the past, organized with each other to decide how we're going to do things together in order to accomplish a particular purpose. So we look at institutions as social tools that are created by persons coming together and organized for a common goal and setting rules and, in some cases at a higher level, creating laws. So those are two very fundamental concepts, so that we're not talking about, for example, some people might think that we're talking in socialist terms, for example, where you got human beings, but you don't get they become part of a collective. So they are one aspect of this collective called society or the community or anything else. So they're not recognized as individuals with rights that adhere to them as individuals. So each person is supposed to be able to have certain rights with how they are going to operate in society. So I think it's very important that we're not in any way diminishing the uniqueness and, as each person is a special creation that's never been here before, and there will never be another creation exactly like each of us. So this is just saying, as Father Ferry, when he mentioned that in his introduction to social justice, he acknowledged that it was going to really upset people who consider themselves individualists. And he was not saying individualists are immoral in any way or, something bad about them, but he's saying if they were aware of this other additional level, not just their one-on-one interactions with other human beings, but their interactions, for example, with their institutions, the government, all these social creations and organizations. I mean, it could just be the company they work for. Then they would start to see that their rights and powers are very much dictated or constrained or enhanced by the organization of the institutions. And so when an institution is sort of creating artificial barriers to everyone's ability, their equal opportunity to develop and contribute, then there's something wrong with that institution that needs to be corrected. And here's another part of personalism and social justice, is that each of us as isolated individuals can't change an institution or society. We can only do it by interacting and organizing with other human beings. And so that there's this new way of looking at people and the world and problems that when we talk about economic personalism, it's a way of identifying problems with that level of human activity that just deals with survival and security needs. It's not the most important, but it's definitely the most urgent. And when we detect, for example, just enormous levels of poverty in the world, and you see power concentrating in a few hands and pretty much not existing for most of the population in the world, something should tell you that, that means 90% of humanity can't really exercise rights, that these are supposed to be universal things. And the reason is not from necessarily a lack of ability on their part, but they are within a social organization that needs to be corrected. And so in terms of economics, when Mike mentioned, the concept that Marx, for example, was looking at labor and capital. Now, when you think about it, today, maybe not as much as 30 years ago, that when people referred to labor, they were talking about human beings providing their work. Labor means a person. Capital means the person who owns the things or owns the companies which employ the labor. So you have what you created were two sets of human beings who were always at odds and in a mortal competition. Rather than, as we view it in economic personalism, these are just two productive things that each person should be able to contribute to whatever extent they can in terms of their labor and also in terms of their ownership of capital. So we've now, rather than defining person as labor, that's just one, economic labor is just one activity human beings do. There's much more to us. So if you define someone as your labor, you've dehumanized them. You've limited them to just their economic function. So we look at labor and capital as simply two things that each of us must be able to own.
Yeah, I should mention that, as a reminder, when we say personalism, we're referring to the personalism of John Paul II.
Yes.
The Thomistic personalism that I can't pronounce in Polish. But there are, as Jacques Maritain said at one point or another, it said there were at one point dozens of different personalisms floating around. So we're very specific that we mean the personalism as articulated by John Paul II in his work.
So what's up with the idea of merely members of the collective? Are we part of the Borg? What do you mean when you bring that up?
Well, I think you do. When you talk about a collective, that's an abstract concept. And in a sense, a corporation is a form of a collective in that it's this abstraction that allows people and things to come together to produce goods and services. There's no flesh and blood corporation. It is something that exists in the laws and, people actually acting within it. So that notion of we're a part of the collective to us doesn't make sense. We may create these abstractions, which are, they're collective things. They are abstractions, but we are the creators of those institutions, not the other way around. Even though those institutions can affect us as human beings, they can either enhance our opportunity and abilities and development, or they can constrain or limit us, or for some people exclude.
Lock you down. Did I say that out loud?
Yeah. One of the things you have to realize is that, especially within the context of personalism, and this is where I found that even though they use different words, once you realize the way they were using them, they were agreeing. Fulton Sheen and Mortimer Adler, the great books philosopher, stressed, to the point of redundancy sometimes, that they were basing their philosophies and their whole approach on Aristotle, not Plato. Not that Plato didn't say a lot of good things or do a lot of good things, but according to Sheen and Adler and Aquinas and a number of others, Plato made one big mistake. That was to assert that the abstractions, the ideas that human beings create in their own mind, have an existence independent of and separate from the human minds that create them. This is like the collective, the capitalist elite, the socialist bureaucracy, the state, even the church. All of these things are abstractions. They have absolutely no existence apart from the human minds that create these ideas. This is not to say they're not real, but they're not the same as actual natural persons. I mean, it's, in Catholicism, we refer to the mystical body of Christ as the church. That doesn't mean that the church itself has an independent existence, that any more than the government of the United States or Congress or even the corner grocery store or anything else. None of these have an existence independent of human beings. They only exist and are meaningful because human beings exist. You can't separate them.
Right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Even though, this is where we get into the binary aspect again. For analytical purposes, we speak of these things as separate and distinct. But in reality and in practice, if we do not recognize that, people and things go together, that individuals as social beings and individuals as individual beings, they're the same person. They're the same human being. Starting to mix up my language there. So that, and I started to get off, I forgot the point I was making, but it boils down to that even though for instance, you can separate for analytical purposes justice and charity and institutions and human beings, and you have to understand them properly. In practice, they have no separate, institutions have no existence separate from human beings. Another way of describing institutions is social habits, accepted ways of doing things, whether, established by law, custom, or tradition. And when they get off track, it's up to human beings, not God or this amorphous, the state or another institution to correct it. This is why when Father Ferry talked about social justice, he said, it is a individual responsibility of every single human being to care for the common good. And when something is wrong, to organize with others to correct it. You can't just sit back and say, well, geez, somebody else ought to fix that or something,
But Father Ferry was also very practical in that he acknowledges that while we have a personal responsibility to care for the common good, which has many levels to it, none of us as individual human beings can, address the entirety of the common good. It's too large, it's too complex, but we can affect and organize to correct every level in which we're living and operating in. So if we're part of an organization, we have to look at where there are certain areas where people may be denied equal opportunity or equal access to participate and contribute, or maybe the distribution of rewards is not set up in a fair and a just way. Then we have to look at, okay, something within this institution that we're part of. We know this institution. We have to then figure out what needs to be changed. Another interesting thing about institutions, or these, their collective abstractions, like the corporation, for example, they have no, I guess it would depend on what they put into their articles of incorporation, but basically corporations, they don't die. As long as you got human beings interacting or using them, they continue in perpetuity. And what that does, it means that it's not any specific individuals who are essential to be existing in order for this entity, this abstract entity, to continue. It becomes, as Mike says, it's habits, social habits, which have become embodied in this thing we call the corporation, which we use as a tool in order to efficiently produce goods and services. When one group moves on, dies, retires, or whatever, you can, as long as you can have new human beings come into that organization and be hopefully taught what the values and the rules are of the organization, then you can continue the organization and it can continue to produce or create things of value. So that's also why things like corporation, I think there's been people associate them now with either, this is something that's powerful and necessary and able to do miraculous things. But also a lot of people view the corporation as it's an evil thing that owns and controls and dictates how the world operates. It's these corporations that are controlling things. Well, we have to remember that these things don't have a life in and of themselves. It's really going to be the people who own them are going to be using them as social tools, and they can pretty much dictate how those tools will be used. So that's another reason in economic personalism that it's essential for our institutions, particularly economic institutions, that you don't have concentrated ownership, that the power that comes with ownership needs to be diffused to the level of each human being.
Yeah, and this segues, in a manner of speaking, into the distinction between individual justice and charity and social justice and charity. See, as individuals, we are required to act virtuously, so that if we see a situation that's individual in nature, we fix it, one-on-one. If people are hungry, the corporal acts of mercy. If someone's hungry, you feed them. If someone's dirty, you wash them. If someone's in prison, you visit them. This sort of thing. I wouldn't bring up, if someone's dead, you bury them. But but social justice is different. A lot of people have the idea that what social justice is if you've got widespread individual problems, then social justice comes in and helps the people with those individual problems. No, what social justice does is make it possible for the problems to be solved. Because why would the problems be so widespread if there wasn't something preventing them from being solved? It's like that great scene in David Copperfield where he runs away from home or school or something, I forget which, and finds I think it's his great aunt, maybe named Bess or something, I forget the name. And he shows up at her house, and And she has been taking care of this somewhat, we'll say, mentally challenged man called Mr. Dick, who is a nice fellow, but he's just not too swift. And so she calls in Mr. Dick because she says she can always rely on his advice. And she says, if a dirty little boy shows up at your doorstep and, and this sort of thing, what would you do, Mr. Dick? And he looks back and says, why, I should wash him. Right there, that's individual justice or charity. But then what the aunt does is arrange for David Copperfield's education and social interaction with others, and makes it possible for him to grow and develop as a human being. Mr. Dick was, individual justice and charity. Here's a problem, let's fix it. He went straight to the heart of the matter. He wasn't bothered by any of these esoteric theories or anything else. He saw a problem, do something about it. The aunt said, well, I don't know if she said it or not, but what she did was arrange for David Copperfield not to be dirty and tired and hungry in the future by helping him get educated and connecting him with the right sort of people so that he could get a job and that sort of thing.
So here's just really quickly, because I know Steve has other questions. Another way to look at this is when you're looking at the problem of poverty and the way that most politicians and most voters are going to think of how you address poverty. You see poor people and you give them something. You give them maybe food, you give them cash in order to buy things. And that is actually a form of at least individual charity. If in some cases you may call it individual justice. But the problem is it doesn't change the conditions in which people can develop and become prosperous on their own in order to get that they're no longer poor. So when we look at economic personalism and dealing with problems in terms of social justice, so we're not talking socialism here, we're talking social justice, which is the ordering of all these institutions and laws in such a way that everyone has access to develop their potential, that no one is excluded, that they have the right and the access in order to use these various social tools so that they can develop. So when we look at economic justice and economic personalism, we have to say, okay, if power is being concentrated in ownership, which is what allows people to have an income, that it gives them the rights to the income from what is produced if they own the thing, then poverty, if we're going to deal with that on a systemic level, we have to look at what are the barriers that are keeping the ordinary person or any person in society from being able to own things that can produce an income. You could say, well, they own their own labor. Well, when you had slavery, people didn't even have that. Someone else owned their labor. They owned their bodies even. But now today, where we see that we're up against advanced technology and robotics and artificial intelligence, and these things aren't going to go away. I mean, unless we have a nuclear holocaust and we blow away our factories, and I'm going back to that dark place now. But
I'm all for EMP if it doesn't take out everybody.
Yeah. Well, so if we took away all of our technologies, okay, that's one thing. But the likelihood is human beings being creative, and also human beings always trying to figure out how to do, get a greater result with less effort, less work. I mean, that's when you think about technology, that's what human beings are trying to do, is do more with less.
That's
so
what
given
Mr. Fuller called ephemeralization, doing more with less. And Jean-Baptiste Say, put it into his whole economic theory.
Yeah. So if that's the case, that we're approaching this whole question of technology in the wrong way, in other words, moving more towards government redistributing the incomes from the owners of these technologies to make sure everyone else doesn't starve, that is still not changing the environment, the social and institutional environment. And that's what we have to start thinking about, is how do we create livable social environments, livable economic environments that enable every person to acquire the things that they need to produce an income so that they are self-sufficient. They're not dependent on the government, and they should not be dependent on private employers either. They should be able to come in as empowered, free individuals who are able to make choices. And if you don't have a situation where people are able to make choices and, pick among various employers where they want to work, then they're not free. If the government tells you that you must work in this line of work and you're never going to get out of that, then that person is not free. That person is owned. So we're looking at the importance of ownership, and as we sum it up in 4 words: own or be owned.
And full disclosure on my EMP statement before anybody loses their mind. Yes, I'm for an EMP to take out all this nasty tech stuff that's coming out. I'm not for an EMP to take out planes and hospitals and all that, just in case somebody thinks I'm some evil guy back here. And yes, I understand it would bring us back to the 1800s and tech, and maybe we need to get back to that. But yeah, Dawn brings up a point with all this, the bleeding heart libs are all caring about the poor. If you go to the World Economic Forum YouTube channel, you'll see a ton of those videos. How do we eliminate poverty? How do we eliminate the poor? How do we feed the hungry? They don't give 2 rips about the poor, the poverty, anything like that. As they just came out saying they want you to eat worms. So communism is about lowering the playing field down, not raising anybody up. So we'll all be equally poor, and that would be our, I guess you'd say, being in the what's the word we're using right now? Collective. The collective needs to be equally garbage, I guess. As you mentioned about corporations need to have virtue, stop being greedy. Problems in the third world nations, usually it's the government keeping the food out. And I remember somebody had a great one about India. Well, if you stop worshiping cows, you can eat the cow. So even theology can make somebody very poor. What were you going to say, Mike?
I was just going to say that, don't you understand that, I forget the name, the Fellowship of the New Life that formed in 1883, that then formed the Fabian Society. It was going to bring the perfect life on earth by pacifism, the simple life, and vegetarianism. This will create the kingdom of God on earth, because the new Christianity is nothing but socialism. The socialism and Christianity are interchangeable terms, according to the Fellowship of the New Life, anyway.
Yeah, they're trying to resurrect that one right now.
I think, Steve, what you were saying really is not a question of is technology by itself, is it good or bad? It's, how you use it. Now you can look at the purpose for which something is created. Is it something that's designed to hurt other people? Then we got a problem there. But it really, we have to look at our tools and our social tools from the standpoint of, do they enable us to have full access, equal access to the common good, which means all those social creations. Now, we're not talking about people's private goods, their individual goods that they own. That's part of private property. But when you talk about the common good, that isn't any particular thing, but it is the overall environment in which we can develop fully as human beings. And if any institution is blocking us from that, or if, for example, by being poor and being in a context where you're not going to be able to easily escape poverty, that most people around you are going to stay poor because the way the economy is set up, is built on faulty assumptions. There's something that needs to be changed, either in the organization of the common good. One of the institutions is not is not acting properly. And for an example, the money system, that really has a tremendous impact on our economic lives, our economic opportunities, whether we as individuals will indeed have access to capital ownership or not. Our laws regarding, private property, are we as owners in a corporation, are we entitled through private property to the full stream of income that our slice of ownership has produced? Well, that's not in the law these days. Management has decision over whether, for example, a dividend, which is your share of profits, whether they're paid out to the shareholders. So even in property law today, and this is, I believe, around the world, I don't know if any other countries are more adhere more closely to the principles of private property, but in essence, owners, particularly the minority owners, don't have the full rights of property. So therefore, they are being denied access to something that would help them, that they could make a decision on how they wanted to live their lives. So I think that I'm going to just assume that most people, whether they call themselves liberals or conservatives, have a natural empathy for other human beings. So if they see suffering, they're going to want to, stop that suffering. And so one way of dealing with that is charity. Another way people would say individual charity is going to be too slow. You're going to have thousands or millions of people dying, so we need to do something using the power of the government to move things quickly. Now, as Mike will say, there may be some just circumstances which demand immediate action, that if you try and reorganize society, you're going to have 1 billion people dead. Well, we got to do something right now. But that isn't changing the environment that maybe led to this happening. So we have to go back and fix what all those institutions, something is either denying access to the common good or there's a flaw in our institutions, such as our money system. Right now, it's designed either to support the programs of government, which gives government a lot of power, or in the case today, what it's become even more so, or largely speaking, it becomes a way for present owners of shares through Wall Street to be able to get money to acquire more shares. And these are not growth shares. These are speculative shares that they know that they're going to use their money to acquire more and wait until the price goes up. Then they can dump them and make more money and then reinvest in some other shares. So what the money system is doing, rather than financing private sector growth to make more goods and services that people want and need, it's just starting to create money that, first of all, in the beginning, just was backed by government debt. And now they're using that kind of government debt-backed money to help rich investors on Wall Street purchase more shares with the idea, well, this is going to create more jobs. Well, that's not what creates jobs. Speculation doesn't create jobs.
I always love that. This is going to create 1.2 million jobs. You guys just throw a number on the air at the wall. That goes back to my original thing of before off topic. I go, people as a whole are stupid. If anybody believes a politician, I'm going to create 600,000 jobs, or this is going to create 500,000 jobs, and you buy that, I have some property on Mars I need to sell you that's on the beach.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, people, there's nothing, good jobs are good to the extent that you really need someone's skills, their labor, to be able to produce something that's going to be valued by someone else. That's important. But we're starting to shift to a point where human labor is going to be, too expensive, too inefficient. You could do certain things a lot faster with the technology. We have to start looking beyond jobs as a source of income. And that's getting back to Mike's point about the binary nature of.
But before you go on, already today, you have Walmart getting rid of all the people that where you cashiers. It's all self checkout. You got the UBI coming down even faster anymore. You got the minimum wage getting pumped up to $15 an hour for literally everywhere. And you got there was an article the other day of how do we train these people for these new jobs, just like we brought up the last time or a couple times before. Schwab talks about how do we get truckers into yoga instructors? How do we teach people to be these new woke jobs?
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, is that it can either be very silly. In other words, you have other people in the government determining, oh, well, let's see where to put you now that, we're going to have to give you your universal basic income, in other words, welfare. What sort of job can we come up with? Well, there are going to be a lot of areas of economic work which are still going to be needed for, quite some time. But then, I think any of the social encyclicals are going to look at work as something beyond just economic work. And Louis Kelso and Mortimer Adler looked at, if you had a society where everyone was economically self-sufficient, in other words, they owned things that could generate an independent income for them, and they didn't need to do economic work, what kind of work what would they do? And in a good society, people should be learning how to do the work of, well, not only self-development, but the work of civilization. How do you contribute to the arts, to medicine, to law, many different things, to teaching, the kind of work that is intrinsically human, that you are able to grow, but you're also able to enhance the environment around you, the social environment, and leave something to the world when you're gone. So,
yeah, which is what Aristotle was talking about, with man as a political animal. What is it that the fully developed human person does in the Greek polis? Well, if you're a man, of course, and you own a lot of slaves, you keep your women locked up and you let the slaves do all the work, while you go down to the marketplace and discuss things, or you engage in sculpture, or you write great works of literature. Well, of course, we're talking about all human beings being able to engage in this leisure work. And instead of having slaves, we'll have technology that we own. The key, of course, is that you do have to own it. You can't just wait for the government to hand you out what it thinks you should have. You have to be productive through either your labor or your ownership of technology so that you can have an adequate and secure income, which will enable you to engage in that work, which helps you grow and develop as a human person, that is, to become virtuous in the Aristotelian sense, more fully human, and thus help build civilization so that other people can do the same thing that you're doing. See, we're political animals. Our acts are not just ourselves alone, but they relate to all others in the polis, the organized community, which also explains, a very key concept, private property. A lot of people think that, this is the thing that I own. And, frankly, in most everyday speech, it doesn't matter whether you call something that you own your property, or you more correctly define it as property is the right I have to or over a thing in relation to other human beings, not to the thing itself.
But wait, Mike, I hear that we're not going to own anything and we'll be happy and we'll be able to rent everything, and drones are going to basically poop out rainbows from the sky and they'll be showered upon us and we won't have to work. Come on, what are you talking about?
Yeah. The fundamental principle of Roman law was that everything has its proper owner. And when they said everything, they meant everything. even other human beings, but that's not the point. The point is that when these, I'm not sure, but I think when these people talk about no one will own anything, what they mean is that no one will have the exclusive right to anything, and no one will have title to it. If they thought about the implications of that, if you don't own where you live, if you don't own the clothes, if you don't even own the food that you're eating, what's to stop somebody else from just taking it? I mean, you've got your hot dog halfway down your throat and they come and take it. Well, why not? You don't own that. What about that those nice clothes you're wearing? Well, I'll strip you naked and just kick you out in the street because I want them and I'm bigger and stronger than you. When someone says that no one will own anything, what they mean is that might makes right. Whoever has the most power will take what he or she wants, and to heck with you.
That might be a good little social experiment to do on the street if somebody comes up to you and starts blowing that smoke up to you. Because I remember a priest told me it was a sermon on absolute truth, and I actually did this to a guy that I was sharing a house with. There was 4 of us guys, and he was one of those, the tree doesn't exist, right? There's no morals or anything like that. He was the second person in a week that told me something that dumb. And he goes, there's no morals. We make up our own. I go, oh, yeah? Well, let me have your wallet. I need your credit card. What? I go, I need to buy some things, and you're going to buy it for me. So let me have it, because I'm not stealing, and you can have it back when I'm done. He goes, well, no, that's mine. That'd be theft. Whoa. It all changes when it gets personalized.
Yeah, it sounds like when Boswell and Johnson were taking a walk one time, and Boswell was kind of egging Johnson on because he knew he had a temper. And he was talking about these people who were saying that, well, these things around us don't really exist. They're just ideas in our own mind, which, of course, Boswell didn't agree with. He just wanted to see what Johnson would say. And, of course, Johnson being Johnson got all angry. And when Boswell said, well, how would you refute it? And Johnson says, I refute it thus. And he goes and kicks a boulder by the side of the road, and, of course, limps for the rest of the day.
I literally had this one guy. I was working at a gym in Denver, and we're just shooting the breeze because we're waiting for the managers to get done with this individual meeting. And he goes, there's no floor. It's kind of like that whole Matrix, there is no spoon. There's no floor. What do you call this? And I just start stomping on the floor. He was so mad they had to get other people to restrain him.
You are a troublemaker, Steve.
And the problem was the managers were backing him up. Oh, don't worry about it. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm surrounded by morons here.
Well, I think that's one of the problems, in modern society is really a rejection of absolutes.
And there are absolutely no absolutes.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely sure, yes.
So when everything becomes a construct of each of our minds, and there is no common, understanding of, okay, what is true? They're facts, which are little pieces of the truth that you have to put together, and there is maybe a larger context, which maybe we don't fully grasp. But if we don't have a sense that there's something that is there, that whether or not we like it, it's there, that is the truth, then we're going to, really, these concept of right and wrong goes out the window. It's whatever you or I decide is right and wrong. And therefore, if I want something, it is not wrong to take it from you. Or you get on my nerves, it is not wrong to kill you. So things start to snowball, and I think that, and this again goes to the nature of human beings as individual with their own perceptions. They got, their senses are not exactly the same from person to person, so they're going to perceive things differently. So you got that aspect of human beings, but you also have something which there's something larger than any one of us. And it really dictates much of how our lives proceed, the consequences we face if we violate something, if we do something that maybe we don't acknowledge. But If we go around saying it's okay to punch people in the faces if they get on your nerves, just go out in public, someone's a little bit rude and you punch them in the face. Well, we're going to have a lot of people walking around with bloody noses, and probably things will escalate from just a punch in the nose. So we do have to have a sense of certain fundamental things like truth, and that's a good starting point, is truth. Whether we like it or not, let's look at all the facts. Let's understand perceptions, how they fit into this, but something actually happens. So let's start with that. Then notions of justice. If justice becomes something that, it's what I think it is, or you think it is, or the elected officials, they think it is, then that's going to be a problem, because each of us has to have a sense that there is something called justice. We're imperfect. We're trying to understand. And that's why we keep fixing our institutions, by the way, because we aren't God. We don't know all things. So human creations tend to be defective, or there's imperfections. So we have to have a sense that there's truth, that there is justice, that we're trying to reach and conform to these sorts of absolutes that exist. They are beyond us. It's something, and that becomes, a whole quest in itself. You can get into a lot of philosophical arguments, but otherwise, if we don't have some common values, some universals, then we're accepting that human beings will always be at war, and that is the natural state for human beings, is to be at war with each other, and it becomes down to who has more, might. Strength. It could be in arms, it could be in economics, whatever. That's going to make right. So we have to decide, I think, as a world, let's figure out what are a couple universals that we all agree to live by as human beings. And this has to, there are going to be certain qualifications. Does this enhance the freedom of every person, their ability to develop, or is it blocking off opportunity? So I think this is a conversation which we have to engage in, and education needs to ask these questions.
I think that's a good way to segue into next time with the private property discussion.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we can go more into that. But even
segue into the whole discussion on the decline of Catholic schools. Big article in I think it was the Washington Post today, about how, especially with the pandemic and the increasing cost of Catholic education, enrollment is, of course, they call it plunging. And I suppose 6% nationwide is a plunge. But it looked like what they were building up with was basically a decline of education all around.
Yes.
It's becoming more obvious in the Catholic schools because they're a little bit closer to the edge. They don't get public funding.
Yeah, Catholic schools anymore are just glorified, expensive public schools. They don't teach the faith. The one I grew up in, even when I was in grade school there, I don't remember being taught anything except communion in the hand. We did have some Ursuline sisters there. They're not there anymore. They were gone. They're gone. They were kicked out by the priest that came in later. But they were down to about, for 6 grades. We had 9 at the time. And now they're down to like 6 total grades. There were under 80 kids. And we had 20 to 30 per grade when I was in there. At least 30, I think. And I don't know how the heck that thing ain't dead, but it's gone. Some of these things need to go away, because one, you're not getting anybody teaching. You're getting these people that got to pay too much for the lady to come in to teach. They're not teaching anything. They're teaching how to speak like a pirate day. Yeah, that's what. Let me pay $30,000 to have my kid talk like a pirate. Yarr. And so it's worthless. Get rid of it. It's just like remember Father did a sermon on sedevacantism, talking and comparing it to the earthquakes in Italy. This was years ago, and people were complaining about the beautiful churches being destroyed. He goes, "Why? Y'all left the faith. What good is it anymore to have them? They're just museums. They're just people for tourists to come in. Let them be destroyed." Same thing with the schools. Good. they can't teach error anymore. They can't teach heresy to the kids. They can't be poisoning our kids. Yeah, I'll get controversial. let the Catholic school system go down. They deserve it.
Yeah, this actually segues into, the great circle here, the reason for economic personalism and man as a political animal and engaging in leisure work.
Uh-huh.
One of the reasons for the decline of Catholic schools is, as you point out, economic. Fewer people entering religion with their vocation as a teacher, so you have to pay the lay teachers much more. Whereas, suppose that everyone had an independent income and someone who, like Don's brother, decided, I'd rather be a teacher. The next question he had to ask was, can I afford to do that? Rather than, do I really want to do that? So if I had an independent income, would I want to teach a bunch of little pointy-headed kids? Maybe. But in order to be able to get public funding or to be able to pay people or to attract students that won't come because they're getting watered down, whatever it is, doesn't matter what religion you're talking about, you better be standing for something if you expect people to pay that much.
Yeah. You better give them something. Promote your book.
Good.
Book.
Book.
Oh yeah, book.
Economic Personalism. There we go. 2 copies of it. Yep. You can go to www.cesj/economic personalism.
It'll be in the show notes underneath the video.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Somewhere.
But you can get through that site. It's on Amazon. You can purchase it through Amazon. But if you go to the link on cesj.org site, what's that?
And Barnes and Noble.
And Barnes.
I don't want to give Amazon exclusive anything at this point.
Okay, yeah, good point. But there are also, for those who want to check out the book, you can download a free PDF version of it. We hope you will like it so much that you will buy the printed version, but we also hope that people will look at it, study it, let us know if they have arguments with it, refer other people to it. Now it's very inexpensive. You just send them a link to the PDF.
And then buy massive quantities in hard copy.
Yes, we would appreciate that too if you like the
also
book.
Put up laudatory reviews on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
Exactly, but
and you wouldn't mind if you had hired a skywriter and put it up there, or had a billboard or something.
Yeah, so go crazy with it. But I think the idea of economic personalism, it's very timely that we start this discussion, and that we also, as Mike said, that the concept of personalism as it was defined by Pope John Paul II, that's a very specific definition and approach to it, and that the same basic concepts which focus on the dignity and empowerment of every human being, that is at the heart of economic personalism. It's just that now you can take the concept and look at it in terms of ownership, property, power, money, and credit, and looking at the sound uses of those things in economic institutions and economic policies, and you can look at them now in a different way, as in terms of dignity, empowerment, liberty, those sorts of things.
Good. All right, everybody get the book. It's underneath in the show notes, the links below. And Michael, Don, thank you, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Enjoyed it.